Electronic gears have arguably been one of the biggest changes in cycling in recent years. The transition from downtube shifters to the ability to shift gears at the hoods, and now the ability to press a button. Electronic gears have removed the old trusty cable and instead replaced it with modern accuracy and improved reliability. However, there are different electronic group sets available, whether that be from Shimano, SRAM or Campagnolo, and then again split between road group sets and time trial group sets. The only difference between road and TT group sets is the move from the shifter hood buttons to the end of the aero poles on your base bar. But before I get into why I would pick one electronic group set over another, how do electronic group sets work and why would you want one? Electronic gears replace the steel cables that would usually run from your shifters to your derailleurs and instead replace it with an electric cable. When you press the button on your shifter, it sends an electrical current through the cables to the derailleur, and this then makes the derailleur move in the direction that you've instructed it to. The benefit of electronic gears are that they are generally quicker than cable actuated shifting. Once set up, they're more reliable, there's no stretching of cable, and you can program them to however you want. This means you can choose which buttons do which, and that means the bike is even more personal to you. For any of you that have ever fitted gear cables through an integrated bike, all the tight corners can reduce the shifting quality significantly. The joy of electronic cables are that there can be as many twists and turns as you'd like, but the quality of shifting is nowhere affected. The only thing that you need to worry about is charging the battery to make sure you have gears all the time. But generally that's only a charge every couple of months, which means it's not a regular maintenance task. So, electronic group sets are great, but which electronic group set should you go for? Next to me is an example of Shimano Ultegra Di2, and I've got SRAM Red eTap here. The SRAM setup is now a couple of years old, but the way it works is identical to the newer versions, and so for the purpose of this video, which is best to go for, it doesn't really make a difference that this is the older model. Unfortunately, I don't have a Campag electronic system, but it works identically to the Shimano setup here. Firstly, it's important to explain how Shimano and SRAM differ. Shimano is a cabled system, which means cables run from the shifters through to a junction box, into the battery and then onto the derailleurs, whereas SRAM is a wireless system. This means that the shifters and derailleurs are all totally separate and work via SRAM's own wireless system. In my example, I've got the TT version of the SRAM eTap, so there are cables to a small junction box from the blips or the buttons at the end of the aero poles, but if this was a road version, it wouldn't have any cables at all. So that's the big difference. SRAM has no cables, Shimano has cables. Also, Shimano has one battery which powers both derailleurs, and that, in most bikes, is situated in the seat tube. However, you charge it through a junction box, which is usually in the end of the handlebars, so you don't need to worry about taking your seat post out each time you need to change gears. I can't take the seat post out on this one anyway. Whereas SRAM has its batteries on the derailleurs instead. So if one battery dies, you can just swap the battery from one derailleur to the other, which means you can always try and change gear. But now the important part of this video. Which is the better option? Why would I pick Shimano or SRAM? Well, in short, my answer is I would use both, but for different purposes. So let me explain. As a long course triathlete and someone who travels for races, the ease of SRAM eTap is an absolute dream. There's no risk of cables being caught on anything in transit, which means I know the system will work when I arrive at the place. Plus, if I'm travelling aboard, removing the derailleurs is very easy. I don't have to worry about cables being exposed. I simply screw off the derailleurs and it's done. Additionally, if a battery dies during a race, it's very easy to try and resolve the issue. Generally, your front derailleur is used significantly less, and so the battery lasts much longer. So in the likelihood that a battery dies, it'll be on the rear, because that's the one I use more. So this means I can quickly swap over the front and rear batteries and then carry on my race. I can live without shifting on my front, but actually it still gives me my rear. Whereas with Shimano, if you get a flat battery, then the whole system cuts out and puts the bike into what's called crash mode, which is where you're in the small chainring at the front, and it will put you in about the 13 or 14 tooth of the cassette. So not an ideal setup if you're racing. If you're just getting home from a road ride, it's okay. So for that security, that my gears will always work, I prefer the use of SRAM on my TT bike. Furthermore, if you're working on your own bikes, TT bikes are notoriously complicated to route cables, and so the ease of SRAM is a massive win. For the home mechanic, eTap is a must for TT bikes. On my road bike, I would choose Shimano, and this is why my answer to which group set I would go for is both. The precision and speed of Shimano is superior to SRAM, and long days in the saddle, it's why I prefer just the excellence of Shimano. This isn't to say that SRAM is slow, it's still significantly faster than any mechanical group set. It's just slower than Shimano. Additionally, the hoods are fractionally smaller than the SRAM road ones, so despite having pretty large hands, I much prefer smaller hoods. Additionally, there are more buttons on Shimano to make your riding experience easier. So for me, I've adapted the top buttons on the shifters to shift up and down the cassette. So actually it works almost identically to SRAM, but I've got multiple options on my Shimano setup. SRAM does have a big advantage in the simplicity of how it shifts. Right shift for a harder gear, left shift for easier gear, same time, front shifting, done. It's super simple, and it's something I do prefer over Shimano. But Shimano's not that complicated, and so this isn't a factor that totally decides it for me. So, in conclusion, the simplicity of SRAM eTap means I would pick it for my TT bike, but I would go for Shimano on my road bike. I hope that this video has helped, and if you're looking at a new bike and are in the lucky position of working out which group set to go for, if you want to see which bikes have which, then head over to the bike catalogue and see which have which group sets, and hopefully it can help you pick your next bike. But if you have any preference as to whether you would use SRAM for your road bike and Shimano for your TT bike, then let me know. Obviously, these are just my views. These are what I've found to be best for my situations that I race in. So, I want to know what you'd choose. Would you go Shimano? Would you go SRAM? Would you go Campact? And I appreciate there are other brands out there as well. More and more people are coming up with electronic group sets. So, there are different options. But hopefully I've tried to tick off the main points between really the big electronic group sets that people generally use, SRAM or Shimano. So, I'm sorry my answer isn't too definitive on if I only had the choice of one, but I think both work well and both work well in certain situations.